This spring I will have been living in Split for no more and no less than a quarter of century. At first, local folk saw me as a duck-billed platypus. Somebody wrote exactly that under my name in one TV show on public television, and later they sort of learned to live with it. Even stopped being surprised after they understood the meaning of the pun split happens, and once they made sure that the condition of the patient was stable. Only journalists continued to mistreat me as an egg-laying furry meemaw with a duck beak for a while at the time when my first novel was a huge success. I guess because nothing was as bizarre as moving from the national capital city to a case study city. I admit it took me quite a while to start feeling at home in Split and to complete my metamorphosis from a guy from Zagreb in Split to an inhabitant of Split originally from Zagreb. I began to feel as a true citizen of this city only when I started to feel what all true citizens feel towards their cities everywhere: admiration and contempt at the same time. Since I have said this 100 times, I see no more harm in mentioning it here again. If some powerful foreign TV production company decided to make a documentary series about Croatia, and if somehow somebody recommended no one else but me as a consultant to a field producer, I would immediately tell them to spend the first third of their Planet Time schedule in Split and its closest surroundings. No Plitvice Lakes, no Istria, no Kopački Rit, nor Dubrovnik, or Kornati Islands, Paklenica or Lonja Field. Only Split for the beginning. Why? Well, because no matter where they go afterwards, practically nothing in Croatia will not be particularly surprising or confusing. Simply because all the best and all the worst of Croatia is concentrated on some 80 square kilometers, condensed in about 200,000 of human brains. Nothing more will happen to these foreign guests. They will not experience anything else without being reminded of something they have already seen or heard or felt in Split. Split is a saturated solution of all that is good and all that is rotten in this country. A neglected state of a neglected people is the best description of the modern Croatia I have heard so far. And Split is a place where you can grasp its full meaning in the shortest possible time. And that is why I admire it, apart from some other reasons. It can be used as a practical tool for learning about the entire Croatia. And I despise it at the same time, as I mentioned, because of the endless chanting about how the countrymen who moved here from the hills are to blame for everything, because citizens of Split always get upset whenever any outsider called their mine increasingly less Mediterranean backdrop a case study city, although secretly they enjoy their specialness, even though it has a negative connotations. I also despise masochistic mantra Split is the craziest city in the world, just as well as the arrogant one, who could pay for all of this. In addition, I slightly despise even myself, because I myself have known to utter those last two sayings from time to time, though rarely, once a year at most. I adore Split because of his undescribable attractiveness on photographs, and despise it because of the uncontrolled greed uglifying that beauty, shielding it even from the eyes of the tourists that were alleged cause for devastation of everything. That is far too well known to the citizens of Split and thus probably too boring for them. I'm fascinated by creative boldness and determination of city governments from late 70s of the last century and their jumping in on the last pre-inflation train, primarily thanks to the hosting of a banal, not too relevant sporting event, Mediterranean Games, and thus making Split look like a serious city more than any other later political Timmy power. I am equally fascinated by, but with completely opposite prefix, disgust of my fellow citizens towards everything created in the period from 1945 to 1919, towards everything without which they would not have been able to proudly claim to be from Split. To cut the long story short and not to repeat common knowledge, probably characteristic for many other Mediterranean cities, majority holds in contempt those fellow citizens they are supposed to admire or respect at least, at the same time admiring and respecting those worthy only of scorn, etc. Let me go back to the statistic from pre-corona times, which made this pandemic period kinda likable to me. Namely, 4 years ago, globally linked Australian tour company Intrepid published a list of countries whose population is most impacted by tourism. In other words, they calculated ratio between a number of domicile population and annual number of foreign tourists. In Iceland, at that time experiencing a huge tourist boom, this ratio was 1 to 6. Hence, 6 foreign tourists for each Icelandson and each Icelandsdottir. Such a result positioned them as the second country on the list, and Croatia came first with a ratio of, now take a deeper breath, 1 to 14. Hey there! 14 tourists for each one of us, I mean each and every one of us, considering that Australians prepared their calculations taking into account only foreign tourists and not domestic ones, and also considering the fact that the figures they used were from 2016, when not so many Croats emigrated and there were less tourists in the record-breaking 2017. It is logical to presume that this ratio was at least 1 to 18 in the end of 2018 as even higher record breaker. And in the highest record breaker ever, 2019, this ratio could have been, say, 1 to 19. If we add this to the fact that there are still some undeveloped tourist areas in Croatia and that the islands and the considerable part of coast are practically in hibernation from late autumn until mid-spring, my uneducated guess would be that we could have reached a ratio of 1 to 20. If not even higher, in the most frequent summer destinations, such as Split city centre, for example. 20 of them against only myself, in a narrow little street paved by uneven and slippery stone slabs. Spider-Man himself would have had some problems handling it, even if there were only 14 of them. And there are never only 14 of them. There can be 30 of them if another cruiser sailed in. Hey, 30 of them in every little street, and in each of those streets you have to wave through tables and chairs on terraces, just like on a slalom course. All 31s hold some blunt or sharp object in their hands, parasol or selfie stick, and you cannot turn anywhere, because the same zombie hordes pour in from every side alley as well, and they have to be back on board of cruiser by 5 o'clock in the afternoon for that night, as they would look at the photos of the destination they visited on their mobile screens, place it next to their plates, a traditional fisherman's night with imitations of fine local food would be held, and they would not even notice that at that time they would already be at least 5 miles away from that day's destination on their way to the next one. For some 5 seasons, from mid-May to mid-September, I try to avoid the old city center. I live in a wider city center area, and everything I need during summer and in any other season anyway is right there, in my neighborhood, apart from the sea. But anyway, sea in Split during summer does not taste like sea, but like a cocktail of UV protection factors and all sorts of other things. I do not remember last time when I bathed on any of the city beaches. And then somebody, somewhere very far away, prepared a bath à la Wuhan for lunch, cooking it up for the entire planet. Throughout the whole summer of 2020, you could walk at a quite a normal pace through the streets of very core of Split, without stopping, without avoiding people, without crowding, although there were some tourists. In the end of the season, after all the calculations, it turned out that there were 50% less tourists than in the previous year, which inspired my friend and fellow citizen Tavrić to write a mini essay for the papers, saying that maybe exactly those 50% is the right quantity for us. Maybe all above this figure is just a fruit of insatiable greed and selfish illusion about enormous amassment of wealth of apartment renters and hospitality business owners from spring to autumn, quite in line with that mean joke of mainlanders saying that Dalmatians work only in summer and idly twiddle their thumbs for the rest of the year. In that case, we might have a better overview and view of everything we have devastated, missed saving, allowed to be destroyed and forgotten to complete, all while chasing new record numbers of overnight stays in ever increasing accommodation capacities. In that case, instead of spending our summers in crowded garage while renting our flats converted to 3-star apartments for €100 per day, we might go back to normal everyday life from our childhood and youth memories. We might have this and that. We might actually come closer to wonderfully flattering sentence of singer-songwriter George Balašević. Split. Once and for all, make up your mind. Are you a city or a holiday? Maybe then, if we became aware of how much actually we have lost in comparison with what we allegedly have gained in the course of recent decades and particularly years, a new kind of split might just look like envisioned in a video to Pharrell Williams' Happy, made by some wonderful young people in 2014.